Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sabdatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Savana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shandavati Tasatha Deshatharine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Sadi Gaur Bhakta Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Gurudeva, Jaya Gurudeva, Gurudeva, Srila Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Pariprajakacharya Stoitrasakasmi Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramhansa Pariprajakacharya Stotra Satusri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnavindi Ki Jai. Ramachandra Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Samveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. All glory is to the assembled devotees. All glory is to the assembled devotees. All glory is to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And one of you bring the pictures of the Houston deities from my dresser top. Hare Krishna. As we approach the auspicious appearance day of Lord Ramachandra on Wednesday, April 21st, Sri Ram-navami, we shall be speaking about Lord Sri Ram from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, Scheduled Incarnations with Specific Functions. Text 23. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Asmad Prasada Sumukha Kalaya Kalesha Ikshvaku Vamsa Avatirya Guror Nideshe Tishtan Vanam Sadaitanuja Avivesha Yasmin Virudya Dashakandara Artim Archat. Asmat, unto us, beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant end. Prasada, causeless mercy. Sumukha, so inclined. Kalaya, with his plenary extensions. Kalesha, the Lord of all potencies. Ikshvaku, Maharaj Ikshvaku, in the dynasty of the sun. Vamse, family. Avatirya, by descending in. Guru, of the father or spiritual master. Nideshe, under the order of. Tishtan, being situated in. Vanam, in the forest. Sadaitaya Anuja, along with his wife and younger brother. Avivesha, entered. Yasmin, unto whom. Virudya, being rebellious. Dashakandara, Ravana, who had 10 heads. Our team, great distress. Archat, achieved. Translation. Due to his causeless mercy upon all living entities within the universe, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with his plenary extensions, appeared in the family of Maharaj Ikshvaku as the Lord of his internal potency Sita. Under the order of his father, Maharaj Dasarath, he entered the forest and lived there for considerable years with his wife and younger brother. Ravana, who was very materially powerful, with 10 heads on his shoulders, committed a great offense against him and was thus ultimately vanquished. Jai. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Lord Rama is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and his brothers, namely Bharat, Lakshman, and Shatrughna, are his plenary expansions. All four brothers are Vishnu Tattva and were never ordinary beings. They're many unscrupulous and ignorant commentators on Ramayana who present the younger brothers of Lord Ramachandra as ordinary living entities. But here in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the most authentic scripture on the science of God, it is clearly stated that his brothers were his plenary expansions. Originally, Lord Ramachandra is the incarnation of Vasudeva. Lakshman is the incarnation of Shankarshan. Bharat is the incarnation of Pradumya. And Shatrughna is the incarnation of Aniruddha, expansions of the personality of Godhead. Lakshmiji Sita is the internal potency of the Lord and is neither an ordinary woman nor the external potency incarnation of Durga. Durga is the external potency of the Lord, and she is associated with Lord Shiva. So here in the first paragraph of the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining the identities of Lord Ramachandra and his brothers, Bharat, Lakshmana, and Shatrughna, and his wife, Sita Devi. They are all transcendental personalities, and they are not in any way or at any time conditioned by material nature. Now the next paragraph. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 4:7, the Lord appears when there are discrepancies in the discharge of factual religion. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. Abhutanam adharmasya tarapanam shijam yaham. And Lord Ramachandra is an expansion of Krishna, and therefore the principles of Krishna's purpose of incarnation also applied to Lord Ramachandra. Brahma Samhita gives the example of a candle. Ramadimurti Shukala Niyamena Tishtan Nanavatara Akaroda Bhuvaneshu Kintu. So Krishna appears in different manifestations, and they are all equal to him. Just like if you have a candle, so from that candle you can light a second candle. From the second candle you can light a third candle. From the third candle you can light a fourth candle. And all the candles have the same candle power, but still there is one original candle, and that is Krishna. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also declares, Aham Adihi Devanam, that he is the origin of all the devas. And Srila Prabhupada comments that the three primary devas are Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. And Krishna is the origin of all of them, including Vishnu. So, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 4:7, the Lord appears when there are discrepancies in the discharge of factual religion. Lord Ramachandra also appeared under the same circumstances, accompanied by his brothers, who are expansions of the Lord's internal potency, and by Lakshmiji Sita Devi. Lord Ramachandra was ordered by his father, Maharaj Dasarath, to leave home for the forest under awkward circumstances. And the Lord, as the ideal son of his father, carried out the order, even on the occasion of his being declared the king of Ayodhya. So the ninth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam contains a summary of the Ramayana in two chapters, chapters 9 and 10. And we know the history that Lord Ramachandra was due to be coronated as the king of Ayodhya. And on the eve of his coronation, Ram's, well, you could say other mother, Dasarath's co-wife, Kaikeyi, reminded Dasarath that he had promised her a boon because she had, served him very nicely. And at the time, Kaikeyi said that she would not accept the boon, but when she required, she would ask for the boon later. Now, Kaikeyi herself loved Ram, but she was weak, and she had a maidservant named Mantara, who was evil-minded. And Mantara influenced Kaikeyi to take the boon that Lord Ramachandra would be banished to the forest for 14 years. And her son, Kaikeyi's son Bharat, would become king. When Maharaj Dasarath heard this request, as a noble Kshatriya, he was obliged to keep his promise. And so he sent, Lord Ramachandra into exile on the eve of his coronation. But he was so afflicted by this tragedy that Maharaj Dasarath, died shortly thereafter. And King Bharat, who loved Lord Ramachandra more than his own life, he refused to occupy the throne. But he himself accepted voluntary exile, some distance away from the capital city of Ayodhya, and he lived very austerely, ruling on behalf of Ram until Ram could return. So we find the Ramayana is full of ideals. Lord Ramachandra himself, the ideal son, the ideal brother, the ideal husband, and eventually the ideal king. And Sita Devi also was ideal chaste wife, and Lakshman was the ideal younger brother. So we have a lot to learn from their examples. So, Lord Ramachandra was ordered by his father, Maharaj Dasarath, to leave home for the forest under awkward circumstances. And the Lord, as the ideal son of his father, carried out the order, even on the occasion of his being declared the king of Ayodhya. One of his younger brothers, Lakshman, desired to go with him, and so also his eternal wife, Sita Ji, desired to go with him. The Lord agreed to both of them, and altogether they entered the Dandakaranya forest to live there for 14 years. Actually, not only Lakshman and Sita wanted to accompany Lord Ramachandra, but all the inhabitants of Ayodhya wanted to accompany him into the forest. But he forbade them, said, no, Ayodhya will become empty if you all follow me. He did agree for Lakshman and Sita to accompany him, although he initially discouraged Sita, saying that you are the daughter of a king and you are used to living in opulence, and life in the forest will be too difficult for you, so better you stay back. You can stay with your father. But she, as the ideal wife, refused. And she said, no, I must go with you. Wherever you go, under whatever circumstances, I will accompany you. During their stay in the forest, there was some quarrel between Ramachandra and Ravana, and the latter kidnapped the Lord's wife, Sita. This also was a very instructive pastime because when Ravana abducted Sita and was carrying her to Lanka, there was a great devotee in the form of a bird, I think an eagle, named Jatayu. And Jatayu saw Ravana carrying Sita away. And he challenged Ravana to fight. And Jatayu was actually very powerful. But at that stage, he was quite old, and he was not able to defeat Ravana in the fight. Later, when Ram and Lakshman were wandering through the forest in search of Sita, they came upon Jatayu, who explained what had happened. And Lord Ramachandra was so pleased with Jatayu, who then was, you could say, on his deathbed due to the wounds inflicted by Ravana, that Lord Ramachandra performed his funeral ceremony just like a son would perform the funeral ceremony for a father. And Srila Prabhupada has commented on this event that sometimes when we're preaching, we may meet formidable enemies who in a way are able to defeat us in our efforts to preach. But the Lord appreciates our effort, just as Lord Ramachandra appreciated the effort of Jatayu, although he was externally, from the material point of view, unsuccessful. But he gave his life, he gave his all for the service of Lord Ramachandra, and thus was rewarded by the Lord. During their stay in the forest, there was some quarrel between Ramachandra and Ravana, and the latter kidnapped the Lord's wife, Sita. The quarrel ended in the vanquishing of the greatly powerful Ravana, along with all his kingdom and family. Sita is Lakshmiji, or the goddess of fortune, but she is never to be enjoyed by any living entity. She is meant for being worshipped by the living entity, along with her husband, Sri Ramachandra. So yes, Sitaram, Lakshmi Narayan, we worship Sita, not separately, but with Lord Ram. We worship Lakshmi not separately, but with Lord Narayan. Sita is Lakshmiji, or the goddess of fortune, but she is never to be enjoyed by any living entity. She is meant for being worshipped by the living being along with her husband, Sri Ramachandra. A materialistic man like Ravana does not understand this great truth. But on the contrary, he wants to snatch Sita Devi from the custody of Ram, and thus incurs great miseries. This is an important point for all of us, that the Lord's energy is meant to be enjoyed by the Lord, meant to be engaged in the Lord's service, and we should not try to enjoy it for ourselves. And if we do try, we incur great sin and have to suffer reactions. The materialists, who are after the opulence and material prosperity, may take lessons from the Ramayana that the policy of exploiting the nature of the Lord without acknowledging the supremacy of the Supreme Lord is the policy of Ravana. So we don't want to be like Ravanas. Ravana was very advanced materially, so much so that he turned his kingdom, Lanka, into pure gold or full material wealth. But because he did not recognize the supremacy of Lord Ramachandra, he defied him by stealing his wife, Sita. Ravana was killed, and all his opulence and power were destroyed. Yes. Krishna Mare Rakeke, Mare Krishna Rakeke. If Krishna wants to kill you, no one can save you. And if Krishna wants to save you, no one can kill you. Krishna is the supreme authority. Lord Ramachandra is a full incarnation with 6 opulences in full. And therefore he is mentioned in this verse as Kalesha, or master of all opulence. Now text 24. Yasma adad udadir uda bayanga vepo margam sapadyari puram haravadik kosha dure surin matita rosha susona dristya tat tapyamanam akaro raganakra chakra. Yasmai, unto him, Adat, gave, Udadi, the great Indian Ocean, Uda Bhaya, affected by fear, Anga Vepa, bodily trembling, Margam, way, Sapadi, quickly, Aripuram, the city of the enemy, Haravat, like that of Hara, Mahadev, Didaksho, desiring to burn to ashes, Dure, at a long distance, Surit, intimate friend, Matita, being aggrieved by, Rosha, in anger, Sushona, red hot, Drishtya, by such a glance, Tatapyamana, burning in heat, Makara, sharks, Urga, snakes, Nakra, crocodiles, Chakra, circle. The personality of Godhead, Ramachandra, being aggrieved for his distant, intimate friend, Sita, glanced over the city of the enemy Ravana with red-hot eyes like those of Hara, who wanted to burn the kingdom of heaven. The great ocean, trembling in fear, gave him his way because its family members, the aquatics, like the sharks, snakes, and crocodiles, were being burnt by the heat of the angry, red-hot eyes of the Lord. Jai. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The personality of Godhead has every sentiment of a sentient being. Like all other living beings, because he is the chief and original living entity, the supreme source of all other living beings. He is the Nitya, or the chief eternal amongst all other eternals. He is the chief one, and all others are the dependent many. Yes, Nityo Nityanam, Chaitanas Chaitananam. The many eternals are supported by the one eternal, and thus both the eternals are qualitatively one, because they're both spiritual and eternal and conscious. Due to such oneness, both the eternals constitutionally have a complete range of sentiments. But the difference is that the sentiments of the chief eternal are different in quantity from the sentiments of the dependent eternals. So this is the sublime philosophy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Achintya Veda Ved Tattva, that the living entities and the Supreme Lord are one in quality, but they are different in quantity. As Srila Prabhupada says, the living the Lord is infinite, and the living entities are infinitesimal, or we would say infinitesimal. So because the living entities and the Supreme Lord are both spiritual, they can have a relationship. But because the Lord is infinite and the living entities are infinitesimal, the relationship is defined by the living entities being servants of the Supreme Lord. Due to such oneness, both the eternals constitutionally have a complete range of sentiments. But the difference is that the sentiments of the chief eternal are different in quantity from the sentiments of the dependent eternals. When Ramachandra was angry and showed his red-hot eyes, the whole ocean became heated with that energy, so much so that the aquatics within the great ocean felt the heat, and the personified ocean trembled in fear and offered the Lord an easy path for reaching the enemy's city. So there's a beautiful, instructive story in the Ramayana that Lord Ramachandra wanted to build a bridge of stones to cross from the southern tip of India to Lanka. And, different monkeys headed by Hanuman, they were throwing huge boulders. And there was a squirrel who was flicking little grains of sand into the ocean. Now, Hanuman chastised the squirrel that, get out of my way. Can't you see I'm throwing these huge boulders and you're just getting in my way? And the squirrel replied, but I want to serve Lord Ram too. Lord Ramachandra overheard this discussion or exchange, and he chided Hanuman. And he said that, you're serving me to your capacity. You're heaving these huge boulders. But the squirrel is also serving me according to her capacity, flicking her little grains of sand. So in my eyes, both of you are equal. And furthermore, I'm the one who's making the boulders float. So why are you taking the credit? So from this incident, we should respect every devotee's efforts in devotional service, however small or big, if they serve with love and devotion to their capacity. When Ramachandra was angry and showed his red-hot eyes, the whole ocean became heated with that energy, so much so that the aquatics within the great ocean felt the heat, and the personified ocean trembled in fear and offered the Lord an easy path for reaching the enemy city. The impersonalists will see havoc in this red-hot sentiment of the Lord, because they want to see negation in perfection. Because the Lord is absolute, the impersonalists imagine that in the absolute, the sentiment of anger, which resembles mundane sentiments, must be conspicuous by absence. Due to a poor friend of knowledge, they do not realize that the sentiment of the absolute person is transcendental to all mundane concepts of quality and quantity. Had Lord Ramachandra's sentiment been of mundane origin, how could it disturb the whole ocean and its inhabitants? Can any mundane red-hot eye generate heat in the great ocean? These are factors to be distinguished in terms of the personal and impersonal conceptions of the absolute truth. It is said in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, the absolute truth is the source of everything. That's Janmadhyasya Yataha, the absolute truth, or Krishna, is the origin of everything. And therefore, everything that exists in us, every sentiment, must also exist in him in its pure original form. As it is said in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, the absolute truth is the source of everything. So the absolute person cannot be devoid of the sentiments that are reflected in the temporary mundane world. Rather, the different sentiments found in the absolute truth, either in anger or in mercy, have the same qualitative influence. Or, in other words, there is no mundane difference of value because these sentiments are all on the absolute platform. So yes, the Lord is absolute, and even the demons who he kills are also liberated. That is his absolute nature. So the demons who are killed by the Lord are also fortunate because they also get liberation. Now, when we were in Amritsar, in Punjab, in India, with Srila Prabhupada, we visited a king, or you could say a former king, named Baladev Indra Singh, who was a real Kshatriya. And he confided in Srila Prabhupada that an astrologer had told him that he had taken part in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, but that unfortunately he was on the side against Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada replied that that cannot be true, because everyone who died on the battlefield of Kurukshetra in the presence of Krishna was liberated. So yeah, the Lord is absolute, and he gives his mercy even to those he killed or to those who were killed in his presence. The different sentiments found in the absolute, either in anger or in mercy, have the same qualitative influence, or in other words, there is no mundane difference of value, because these sentiments are all on the absolute plane. Such sentiments are definitely not absent in the absolute, as the impersonalists think, making their mundane estimation of the transcendental world. There was a very instructive incident that took place in the first Delhi Pandal that was held at a very prominent location near Connaught Circus in New Delhi. And at one stage, Srila Prabhupada became angry. And his becoming angry caused a sensation amongst the people in the audience. And there were probably 15 or 20,000 people in attendance. And actually, Srila Prabhupada engineered the whole event to be instructive. But an American or Australian sort of ruffian had come to the Pandal, and he was challenging Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada, he was down, in the audience. Prabhupada was up on the stage. And Prabhupada invited him up on the stage. And, he challenged Srila Prabhupada, and he asked, how old is the Bhagavad Gita? Srila Prabhupada answered, 5,000 years old. And the young man said, no, according to my information, and he gave his theory. And so he was challenging Srila Prabhupada with these different questions. And then Srila Prabhupada didn't answer the next question. He said to the young man, what is the process for understanding the Bhagavad Gita? And the young man, shouted back, no, you answer my question. I asked you first. And Srila Prabhupada replied, I'm not your servant. I don't have to answer your question. You answer my question. What is the method for understanding the Bhagavad Gita? So the young man became angry, and eventually Prabhupada motioned to the devotees to escort him off the stage. So I was in the audience distributing books. And the audience was very divided. Many people were saying, your Guru Maharaj should have answered his question. Why did your Guru Maharaj become angry? He shouldn't have become angry. And meanwhile, Srila Prabhupada on the stage answered the question, what is the process for understanding the Bhagavad Gita? And it's by submission, not by challenging. And there were some political leaders who had been supporting the program. And, they might have been seeking some advantage to get popularity with thousands of pious people who were attending the Pandal program. So one of those political leaders, like off stage, obviously, said to Mother Malati, your Guru Maharaj has spoiled everything. He got angry. And Malati replied, my Guru Maharaj didn't spoil anything. And she gave him a slap on the cheeks, demonstrating her transcendental anger. And yeah, it was very instructive that you can't understand the Bhagavad Gita by challenging. And also it was instructive that, pure devotees have every sentiment of the Supreme Lord, including anger. But their anger is transcendental. Prabhupada's anger was transcendental. After the Delhi Pandal, Srila Prabhupada was staying in a friend's home, in a nice residence, and a devotee came to visit Srila Prabhupada. That devotee was translating Srila Prabhupada's books into Hindi, and he came with his father. And the father had a problem of being addicted to smoking. So, Prabhupada asked the boy's father, have you given up smoking? And the man said, no. Can't I get some special mercy? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, there is such a thing as special mercy. And he quoted from Srimad Bhagavatam, Yasyaham anugrinami harishe tadanam shanai. Lord Krishna says, the first installment of my special mercy is I take everything away from my devotee. So Srila Prabhupada asked the boy's father, so do you want special mercy? And the man said, no, Prabhupada, I'll do it myself. So then, I'm coming now back to the point of anger. So then a young man came to visit Srila Prabhupada. He was maybe American or English or Australian. And he waxed eloquent, saying that, you know, if everyone just became Krishna conscious, there would be no more anger or hatred in the world, and everyone would love one another. And Srila Prabhupada replied, anger? Is there something wrong with anger? Did someone tell you there's something wrong with anger? Krishna spoke the whole Bhagavad Gita just to make Arjuna angry, because he wanted Arjuna to fight and kill the opponents. And you can't do that unless you're angry. So Krishna spoke the whole Bhagavad Gita just to make Arjuna angry. So who told you there's something wrong with anger? So this is again the point that nothing is good or bad. As Chaitanya Charitamrita says, nothing is good or bad. In the material world, everything is bad, but if it's used in Krishna's service, it's good. And so anger can also be used in Krishna's service. And anger can also be exhibited by Krishna or Lord Ramachandra. So now there's one more verse, and it is such a beautiful verse. I love it. And I'm sure you will too when you read the translation. Hear the translation. Text 25. Vaksha stala sparsha rubna mahendra vaha dantar vidambita kakub jusa udahasam sadyo shubhi saha vineshyati darahartur vishpur jitar danusha u charato disaigne. Vaksha stala, chest. Sparsha, touched by. Rugna, broken. Maha Indra, the king of heaven. Vaha, the conveyor. Dantai, by the trunk. Vidambita, illuminated. Kakup Jusha, all directions thus being served. Uda Hasam, overtaken by laughter. Sadhya, within no time. Asubhi, by the life. Saha, along with. Vinashyati, was killed. Dara Hartu, of the one who kidnapped the wife. Vispur Jitai, by the tingling of the bow. Danusha, bow. Ucharita, strolling fast. Adisainye, in the midst of the fighting soldiers of both sides. So listen to this translation. When Ravana was engaged in the battle, the trunk of the elephant which carried the king of heaven, Indra, broke in pieces, having collided with the chest of Ravana. and the scattered broken parts illuminated all directions. Ravana therefore felt proud of his prowess and began to loiter in the midst of the fighting soldiers, thinking himself the conqueror of all directions. But his laughter, overtaken by joy, along with his very air of life, suddenly ceased with the tingling sound of the bow of Ramachandra, the personality of Godhead. I'll read it again. It's so beautiful. Translation. When Ravana was engaged in the battle, the trunk of the elephant which carried the king of heaven, Indra, broke into pieces, having collided with the chest of Ravana, and the scattered broken parts illuminated all directions. Ravana therefore felt proud of his prowess and began to loiter in the midst of the fighting soldiers, thinking himself the conqueror of all directions. But his laughter, overtaken by joy, along with the very air of life, his very air of life, suddenly ceased with the tingling sound of the bow of Ramachandra, the personality of Godhead. Purport. However powerful a living being may be, when he is condemned by God, no one can save him. And similarly, however weak one may be, if he is protected by the Lord, no one can annihilate him. Yeah, I quoted that earlier. Krishna Mare Rake Ke, Krishna Rake Mare Ke. Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. So, my dear devotees, if you have any comments or questions, you can speak now. Thank you for joining us. So yes, if you want to say anything, you can raise your hand.
Hare Krishna. If there are no other questions from anyone in the call, I'll hand it over to His Grace Vrindavan Bhaya Prabhu, who's in our temple room to stream the Rajbhog Arati. So on behalf of the entire ISKCON of Houston community, we would like to thank you, Maharaj, for your association. Okay, there's actually one question. So Narottama Das Prabhu, you can ask.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You are audible and visible.
Thank you. Please accept my humble obeisances in the rest of the lotus feet, Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, I just had a small question. So, according to the last verse that you mentioned, is it that Indra was a part of the battle, a part of the war between Ram and Ravana?
Oh, well, I always took it that he gave his chariot to be used, but not that he personally was present. That's how I took it. But let's see more closely. Yeah, it doesn't say that he was present. Just that his chariot was there. Yeah. It's an interesting question. Nice to see you. Nice to see you in your. So I see Krishangi Dasi has her hand up.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. I had a question, but can I ask a question not directly related to the class, or it can be related also?
Okay.
I was in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It mentions that about the gopis and the cowherd boys in Vrindavan, that they attained that position after many lifetimes of pious activities. So I would like to know what kind of pious activity, what is the definition of those pious activities that they have done to get the personal association of Krishna.
Oh, well, it says pious activities, but it actually refers to devotional service. By, you could say, mundane pious activities, one cannot get that result, but one can get the result by devotional service, which is the most pious of activities.
Thank you.
Okay. Sargam Srivastava.
Hare Krishna Maharaji, my most humble obeisances to you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me, Maharaji?
I can hear you and I can see you.
That's great. Thank you so much for your darshan, Prabhuji. Maharaji, I had one question. I had heard in a few talks that Lakshman was actually, Nityanand Prabhu is actually Lakshman ji. Is that true? I mean, is it that we get all the devotion and we can learn how to serve the Lord through Nityanand Prabhu because his other incarnation, that is Lakshmanji, had always served Lord Rama during Lord Rama's avatar. I don't know how to put the question, but they are both one, is it?
Yes. The original is Krishna and his first expansion is Balaram, his older brother. And so, sort of in that line, you have Rama and then you have Lakshman. And then you have Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. But it's explained in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that Lakshman, as the younger brother, had to do so many things that he didn't want to do because of being the younger brother. And he didn't want to do them because they were, in a way you could say, unfavorable to the pleasure of Sita and Ram. So he resolved that in his future appearances, he would not be the younger brother. He would only be the older brother. So he could just give pleasure to Krishna and not have to do anything unfavorable to the Lord's pleasure. So then, so then as Balaram, he's Krishna's older brother, and as Lord Nityananda, he's like Lord Chaitanya's older brother.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Maharajji.
Hare Krishna.
Maharajji, there was one more question actually. You just mentioned to us about how Srila Prabhupada ji had got angry with the person, and then his devotee, one Mataji, slapped the person who um, um, asked the question. Would that be? I mean, they were great personalities, but would that be? Would the Mataji's thing be aparadh?
Sorry?
I mean, how can we? I mean, would it be like how I have got to know that even the slightest of anything which would hurt somebody would be a aparadh, which we might uh, um, unconditionally do. But if there is something like this, if a Mataji does, would that also be a aparadh?
Well, I mean, we cannot imitate Malati Devi Dasi.
Okay. Okay.
She is on a different level. She's
Okay.
like completely devoted to Srila Prabhupada. One time, Srila Prabhupada said of her that, that she would cut her throat for him, and he would cut his throat for her. So she's not an ordinary Mataji.
Okay.
And we should not imitate her. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maharajji. Thank you so much. My
Hare
most
Krishna.
humble obeisances. Hare Krishna.
Okay.
Okay, Maharaj. If there are no other questions, okay, one more. Go ahead.
Pavitra?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and all glories to you. Guru Maharaj, I have a question. You mentioned about this former king who met Srila Prabhupada, and he said that he was in the battle of Kurukshetra, and Prabhupada said no, because otherwise he would have been liberated. But even if he was in the opposition side, they all got liberation. But did they all get Brahman liberation? And then if that's the case, then do they have to come back again?
Oh, well, that's a good question. What kind of liberation they got? And there are 5 kinds. To live on the planet with the Lord, to have the same opulence as the Lord, and so on. But one of them is Sayuja Mukti, that impersonal liberation. It's possible, theoretically, that he could have gotten impersonal liberation and then fallen down again. But I think that Krishna's mercy is so great that he would give them permanent liberation. Yeah, he's just so kind and merciful. Well, that was a good question.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, Maharaj. Thank you, Giriraj Maharaj, for your wonderful association, and thank you so much for the wonderful class. As Maharaj mentioned, Rama-navami is this week. It's Wednesday, April 21st. And from our ISKCON Houston program, we have an online festival in the morning starting at 7 a.m. with a kirtan and a class by His Holiness HH Swami. And then in the evening, we are having a walk-through darshan, which is RSVP required. So please RSVP by Tuesday evening for Rama-navami. That way we can prepare prasadam accordingly as well as maintain a record of RSVPs. So with that, thank you again, Giriraj Maharaj, and Hare Krishna to everyone.
I would say, if we're going to end now, that we should conclude with Vaishnav Pranam.
Yes, Maharaj.
Let us offer our respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnav devotees of the Lord, who are just like desire trees, who can fulfill the desires of everyone and are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Panchakalpa Trubhya Yo Namo Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrindi.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hare Om.